Hello everybody, it's Crystal. Welcome to my channel, Bagoday Crochet. So today I got a nice, quick, super simple crochet beanie that would work well for a man or a woman. Kept it nice and clean and simple. Alright, so this should fit about 19 to 23 inch head. If you need to make it bigger, you can add one more row of increases. If you need to make it smaller, you can leave off a row of increases. So from top to bottom is about 7.5 inches. I do say how you can make it a slouchy just by adding more rows of the cluster stitch. So it's just made with the double crochet cluster stitch. Very simple. Like I said, I kept it clean, nice simple crochet brim. But you know what? You change it up to your likings, however you'd like to do it. You know, I just lay it out here and then you make it your own. I do want to apologize up front for my dark yarn, but it is a very simple beanie, and I think that I held that up pretty close. You'll be able to see what I'm doing. So the yarn that I am using is a Vanna's Choice from Lion brand. It is a 100% acrylic, medium weight number 4. There are 170 yards or 156 meters per ball. I probably use 150 yards for this hat, and the color that I use is called Midnight Blue. It's gorgeous. Now I do mention later that I do have a stitch tutorial for this exact stitch right here. If you'd like to make a matching scarf, I will put a link to that below in the description box. And then for this particular hat, well, I'm going to be using a size I, which is a 5.5 millimeter crochet hook. You ready? Can you double crochet and single crochet? Yeah, you got this hat. You can do it. Let's go. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and start out with a slip knot on our hook, and then we're going to work a chain of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we're going to slip stitch back into the first stitch to form a ring. If you'd like to use the magic circle here, that would be fine. I'm not going to do that. Slip stitch in there, and there's my ring. So I'm going to chain 1, which does not count as a stitch. And I want to work 12 double crochets through the center of this ring. I'm going to yarn over and insert my hook through the ring, grab my working yarn and pull it back through, and then do my double crochet like normal. So that's 1 double. Again, we're going to yarn over, put my hook through the ring, grab my working yarn, pull it back through the ring, and then do my double crochet as normal. So that's 2 doubles we've done. We want to do a total of 12 through the center of the ring. I'm going to go ahead and continue this, and I'll meet back up with you when I get my 12 double crochets done. Alright, so I made it back around to my starting point, and I have 12 double crochets, and you can usually pull your tail and close that center circle up a little bit more. And we're going to end round 1 by slip stitching into our first double crochet. Like that. So we have 12 doubles at the end of round 1. Now we're going to start working cluster V stitches. So we're going to chain 1 to start off. Then that does not count as a stitch. And we're going to work in this very first stitch here that we just slip stitched into. And we're going to yarn over, and we're going to go into that stitch, and we're going to draw up a loop. And we're going to yarn over and just go through 2 loops that are on our hook. And then we're going to yarn over again, go into the same spot, draw up a loop, and we're going to yarn over and go through 2 loops that are on our hook. And that will leave us 3 that remain. Yarn over and go through all 3. And then we're going to chain 1, and we're going to do that same thing again in the same stitch. So we're going to yarn over, go back into the same stitch, draw up a loop, and yarn over and go through the first 2 loops on our hook. Yarn over and go through the same stitch again, draw up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2 loops on our hook. That will leave us 3. We're going to yarn over and go through all 3. So that is a cluster V-stitch. And we want to work one of those in every single one of these double crochets from the previous round. So we're going to go over to the next stitch. We're going to do another cluster V. So we're going to yarn over, go into the next stitch, draw up a loop, and yarn over and go to the first 2 loops. Yarn over again, same stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2 loops. 3 loops remain, yarn over and go through all 3, and chain 1. So that's half of the cluster. Now we're going to do the same thing in the same spot. We're going to yarn over, go into that same spot, draw up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2 loops, yarn over and go into the same spot again, draw up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2 loops. 3 loops will remain, yarn over and go through all 3. So that is our second V-stitch cluster. Now remember, we want to do 1 in each one of these double crochets. So again, we'll move to the next one and do another one. Yarn over, go into the next stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2 loops, yarn over, go into the same stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2, 3 remain, yarn over and go through all 3, chain 1. That's 1 half of the cluster. We're going to do the other half in the same stitch. We're going to yarn over, go into the same stitch, draw up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2, yarn over, same stitch again, draw up a loop, yarn over and go through the first 2, 3 remain, yarn over and go through all 3. So we have done 3 V-stitch clusters. So I'm going to continue around and I'm going to work 1 V-stitch cluster in each one of these double crochets, and I'll meet back up with you at the end of row 2. Alright, so I've made it all the way around to the end of round 2, and I have 12 of these cluster V stitches. So we're going to go ahead and end round 2 by slip stitching into the top, or just right around this area of this first cluster, of the first cluster V stitch. Doesn't have to be exact, somewhere around there. Okay, now we're going to slip stitch over to the chain 1 space of the first cluster V stitch. I apologize for my dark yarn. You just slip stitch right over into that chain 1 space, and we're going to chain 1, which does not count as anything. So now we're going to work on round 3. Now round 3, we are just going to be working a cluster V stitch in each one of the chain 1 spaces from the cluster V stitches from the previous round, in the chain 1 spaces. Alright, so we just slip stitch into the first chain 1 space. So we're just going to go ahead and work a cluster V stitch into that space, just right through the chain 1 space. Just like that. And then we're going to jump over to the next one. So remember not to go in between them. We're going in the chain 1 spaces. So right here, the chain 1 space that we made. So I'm going to go jump all the way over here and do a cluster V stitch in that chain 1 space. Like that. And then I'm going to find my next chain 1 space. Sometimes you gotta look. Right there it is. And I'm going to jump over there and do a cluster V stitch into that chain 1 space. And this is what round 3 consists of. Just working a cluster V-stitch into the chain 1 space of the previous cluster V-stitch. So you're gonna look forward here. There's my V-stitch. There's my chain 1 space. Jump right over there and do a cluster V-stitch in it. And I'm going to repeat this pattern all the way around for round 3, working the cluster V in the chain 1 space of every cluster V from the previous round. And you should have 12 of them whenever you make it to the end of round 3. So I'll see you there in just 1 second. Alright, so I made it to the end of round 3, and I have my 12 cluster V stitches. It's okay if it's not laying flat. We'll take care of it. So what we're going to do is end by slip stitching into that first cluster of our first cluster V, like that. And now we're going to have to do a row of increases. So what we're going to do is slip stitch over here to the chain 1 space of our first cluster V stitch. Alright, so we have 12 cluster V stitches. What we're going to do now is we're going to do 3 cluster V stitches in the chain 1 spaces. 1, 2, 3, and then we're going to do an increase cluster V stitches. It will do it in between the cluster V stitches. So let's go ahead and begin. So we're going to chain 1 here, which doesn't count as anything. So this first cluster V stitch, we'll go ahead and put a cluster V stitch into that chain 1 space. Okay, and then we're going to jump to the next chain 1 space right here and do another cluster V stitch into that chain 1 space. Like that. Now we're going to do 2, and then we're going to do a increase. So we've done 2 cluster V stitches in the chain 1 spaces. You see 1, 2. Now the next one is going to be the increase. It's going to be a cluster V stitch, but we're not going to do it in the next chain 1 space. We're going to do it in the space between the next 2 clusters. So right here, we're going to do a cluster V stitch, and this will be our increase stitch. So just do a cluster V stitch into that space. Just like that. And now we're going to work again. We're going to put a cluster V stitch into the next 2 cluster V stitches, the chain 1 spaces of them. So there's 1. Now we're going to jump to the next cluster V stitch and do another one. Like that. So we've done 2 again in a row. Now the next one is going to be an increase. Remember, that is not, the increase is not done in the chain 1 space. It's done in between the next 2 cluster V stitches. So in this space right here, we'll do a cluster V stitch, and that will be our increase. And that's the pattern we're going to repeat now for round 4. That. So 1 cluster V stitch in the chain 1 space of the next 2 cluster V's. So there's one, jump to the next one right here, the chain one space. There's two, so we've done two in a row. Now the next one has to be our increase, so that is where we do it, not in the chain one space, but in between the next two cluster V stitches. So this space right here is our increase, so we do a cluster V stitch into that space. So we're going to go ahead and repeat this pattern. We do two cluster V stitches in the chain one spaces, and then we do our increase in between that spot and between the next two cluster V stitches. And we're going to work this all the way around, and I'll meet back up with you at the end of round 4. Alright, so I'm coming to the end of round 4. I just did 2 cluster V stitches in the chain one space, and I have to make an increase here, right here at the end in this spot. So we're just going to go ahead and put a cluster V stitch right there in between those 2 cluster V stitches from the previous round. Like that. And again, we're going to go ahead and end round 4 by slip stitching into that first cluster of our first cluster V stitch. And you should have a total of 18 cluster V stitches now. Alright, for round 5, we're going to do one more round of increases. And we are going to do 9 cluster V stitches in the chain one space of the next 9 cluster V stitches, and then we'll do the increase. Okay, because we want to have we have 18 now. We want to have a total of 20, so we just need to do 2 more increases. So we're going to go ahead and slip stitch over here to the chain one space of the first cluster V stitch and chain 1. Now we're going to cluster V stitch in the chain one space of the next 9. So 1 here, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then I'll meet back up with you. So 9 cluster V stitches in the chain one spaces of the next 9 cluster V stitches. All right, I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I will meet back up with you. And that will be our last increase, and from there on out, it'll be smooth sailing. So that's my first one. There's number 1. I'll jump to my next chain one space right there of my next cluster V stitch and work another. Alright, I'm going to continue this until I get a total of 9, and I'll see you in just a second. Alright, so I've done 9 cluster V stitches. Now we have to do 1 increase, so we have to do it in between our next 2 cluster V stitches right here. Not in the chain one space, but in between. We just work a cluster V stitch. And that is our increase stitch. Like that. And now we're going to work what we just worked. We are going to work a cluster V stitch in the chain one space of the next 9 cluster V stitches. And you should have 9 left, and then we'll put an increase at the end. So continue on, just repeating what we just did. 9 cluster V stitches in a row in the chain one space of each cluster V stitch from the previous row. All right, and I'll see you there in a second. All right, I've made it to the end of round 5. I did 9 cluster V stitches in a row, and now we have to make 1 more increase, and that's right here at the end in between the last cluster V stitch here and the first one on this side. So right there in that space, we're going to do a cluster V-stitch. And that will end row 5, and you should have a total of 20 cluster V-stitches. And that's the number that we want to keep now. I don't know what happened. Let me redo that. Sorry about that. Alright, now you want to end by slip stitching again into that first cluster of the first cluster V-stitch. Alright, 20 cluster V-stitches. Now what we're going to do is we are just going to work round and around and around, putting a cluster V-stitch in the chain 1 space of every cluster V-stitch. So we're going to slip stitch over to the first chain 1 space, chain 1, and cluster V-stitch in it. So we're not going to be doing any more increases now. It's just going to be straight up cluster V-stitches, 20 in every row. Alright, and we're going to work them in the chain 1 space of the previous cluster V-stitch. We're going to do this until we get a little bit of length on the hat. You can actually do it for as long as you want. I'm going to put a brim on mine probably, so. And whenever you make it back around to the end, you just slip stitch like we have been into this first cluster of the first cluster V, slip stitch over to the chain 1 space and start again. And you just keep doing rows of 20 cluster V stitches, one in each of the chain 1 spaces from the previous row. Alright, I'm going to continue along, and I'll let you know here in just 1 second how many total rows I have done. I'm on row 6 right now. Alright, I'll see you in a second. Alright, so I have done a total of 10 rounds. You can do more if you like, and if you'd like it a slouchy, you can do, all you have to do is keep doing more rounds. I don't know, three or four more rounds, depending on how slouchy you like it. And now I'm going to add a brim. Now, if you don't want to add a brim, you can add a couple, add it to whatever length you want, but I'm going to add a brim on mine. So I've done 10 rounds, and now I'm going to start round 11, and I slip stitch here into my side of my first cluster there. I'm going to chain 1. I'm going to go back, and I am going to single crochet right back into that same spot. Then I'm going to single crochet into the chain 1 space of the cluster. Then I'm going to single crochet into the top of the other half of the cluster. And this is what I'm going to do all the way around. So each cluster will get 3 single crochets. So I'm going to here's my next cluster. I'm going to single crochet into the top of the first half of it. I'm going to single crochet into the chain 1 space. And I'm going to single crochet in the top of the other half of that cluster. And that cluster is finished. We'll move on to the next one. Single crochet into the top of the first half of this cluster. Single crochet into the chain 1 space of this cluster. And then single crochet into the top of the second half of this cluster. And this is the pattern that I'm going to repeat all the way around. Remember, 1 single crochet on the first half of the cluster, a single crochet in the chain 1 space of the cluster, and a single crochet in the top of the second half of the cluster. So every cluster will get 3 single crochets. And this is round 11. And when you make it back around, we should have a total of 60 stitches if we do it correctly. since we have 20 clusters. Each one of them is getting 3 singles. So I'll meet back up with you at the end of round 11 here, and count your stitches, and you should have a total of 60. All right, I'll meet back up with you in just a second. All right, so I've made it to the end of round 11, and I have 60 single crochets. I'm not going to do anything fancy for the brim. I'm just going to do some rounds of single crochet. So I'm going to use this piece of yarn as a stitch marker, and I'm going to put it right here where my last stitch, where I just did my last single crochet, and right before my first single crochet, right here. So what I'm going to do is just for round 12, I'm going to jump over here to my first single crochet, and I'm going to single crochet in it. And now I'm just going to work around, and I'm going to put 1 single crochet into every single stitch all the way around. When I make it back around to my stitch marker, I still should have the same amount of stitches. And then I will move my marker up and go around again. Now you can do as many rounds of single crochet as you'd like, depending how wide or how long you want your brim to be. That is completely up to you. I'm just trying to keep this hat nice and simple. Sometimes nice and simple is good. Nothing fancy. Nice, clean, and simple. So I'm on round 12 right now. 1 single crochet in every stitch. I'll make it back to my stitch marker. I'll move my marker up, and I'll go around again. 1 single crochet in every stitch. I'm not sure how many rounds of single crochet I'll do. I'll have to try it on every now and again. But you can do as many as you'd like. Like I said, some people prefer a lower brim than others. You might only want 1. I mean, you could try it on and just see what you like, all right? So I'm going to continue around with my single crochet, and I'll let you know here in just a second how many total rows that I do. All right, so I have done a total of 3 rounds of single crochet. So that brings my total rows from row 1 all the way down 13 rows. So row 11 was our first row of single crochet, and then I did 2 more after that for a total of 13. That's good enough for me. You do more or less if you like. It's your hat, you're wearing it, not me. But once you make it back to your stitch marker, just go ahead and slip stitch into that spot. And then we can tie that off, move that marker, clip, clip, clip our yarn, and we can hide our tail. Now, this was a super simple, quick, easy beanie that will work for a man or a woman, like I mentioned, gender neutral. Go ahead and hide that tail and any remaining tails that you have. And that's it. I hope you enjoyed my tutorial. If you want to make a scarf to match this, I do have a stitch tutorial on how to make this exact stitch in the back and forth method. This one, the double crochet, or the cluster stitch up here. I'll link that below. You just follow those directions on how to make that stitch. And scarves, you can make it as big as you want. I usually make mine anywhere from 8 to 12 inches wide. Lengthwise, I usually do them anywhere from 6 to 12 foot long. So it just depends on what you like. But that's it. I hope that you enjoyed my video. Super quick, super simple, super easy, and super beautiful. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed. Hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see more. Let YouTube know that you'd like to see more. I got tons of tutorials. And if you don't mind, leave a comment below. And I'll see you guys on my next one. Take care. Bye, guys.